presentation today. Good morning to everyone. And today my talk is part from a section from my Ph.D. thesis, which is about exploring the effectiveness and equity of English medium instruction on self-efficacy development. And it's a longitudinal study of business students in Vietnam. So my talk is structured around several questions. Hopefully I will stay within the time. Questions being asked include what are the gaps in the scholarship, so I'll talk about the literature review of my field. Then how did I theorize my research questions, so offering a theoretical framework of my research. Then how did I do the research, methodology, what did I find, and what does that all mean? So the implications of my findings and moving forward with the literature. So this is my little outline. First of all, a bit about the current state of the literature. I focus on self-efficacy, which is an important construct proposed by Bandura, the psychologist. And it's about self-efficacy refers to the influence of cognitive processes on your behavior. So how well you perceive your ability to perform some actions for a desired outcome. How well do you think you can carry out a task, basically. And it's more complex than I initially thought it is. So it's multi-dimensional, and it includes at least 3 dimensions. First, mastery experiences, so that involve active engagement in tasks and subsequent success. And that provides direct evidence of someone's ability. So the more you do something, the better you're good at it, and the more confident you are with the task. That's mastery experience. Then we have social modeling, which entails the influence of observing and imitating behaviors of other perceived role models surrounding you, and that fostering a sense of identity and emulations of success peers. So if you are surrounded with successful peers, you are more motivated and you think that you are more capable somehow. So that's social modeling. And then we have the last one, which is verbal persuasion, which involves the impacts of external feedback or on self-efficacy beliefs. So with encouragement or with guidance from your peers, your instructors, who constantly reinforce your ability, you feel more self-efficacious, you feel more confident about yourself. So that's the first one about self-efficacy. Then I want to pick a context on English medium instruction. I know some of you here are doing also working on the same area. So English medium instruction refers to the delivery of academic content through English as a second language in the countries where when English is not the first language of the population. So think about Asian countries, like my own context in Vietnam, we speak the same first language, Vietnamese, but English is now picking up as the global language of research, of commerce, of education. So we learn business content through English a lot in universities as well. And why is it important to talk about EMI? It's because nowadays we are internationalizing and opening up the education, not just in some established English-speaking context anymore. Students can access English-taught education from their own home context, and that leads to a lot of benefits with enhancement of your English skills or the employment prospects for those students participating. I think that we need to understand how EMI affects business students, learners' self-efficacy. What are really the factors shaping their confidence in their ability? I did some research, and there's a gap in the understanding on this area, especially the current research tend to ignore the multidimensional nature of self-efficacy, and there has been lack of longitudinal evidence. We don't know how it's changed over the years, and we don't know how these can affect different students from different social economic backgrounds. So these are the main gaps that I want to focus on through my PhD, through my research. So I want to talk a little bit about the theoretical framework that I use for my research as well. Theoretical framework is important. It helped me to formulate my research questions on some theoretical basis and help me to test some hypotheses if I have along the way with my empirical evidence. So educational attainment is complex. There are many factors around it that influence academic success for students that can come from societal, institutional, family, and individual levels. So I am obsessed with Bourdieu theory, and I think for good reasons. Bourdieu theory helps us to understand these factors in a more structured and systematic way. So he focuses on and argues that there are different types of capital, and it moves beyond the mere narrow understanding of Karl Marx about economic capital to include economic capital, which is the monetary or the financial resources that one had and can afford, such as household income or affordability of private education, for example, in the UK context. And then there is social form of capital, which involves social networks and relationships that can confer social advantages, such as, attendance at selective schools, or, exclusive membership to some social clubs here, for example, in the UK. And there's also a form of cultural capital, which is about the knowledge, skills, and practices that are highly valued within the dominant social groups. So we're talking about having proficiency in English language, for example, because it's nowadays a global language and everyone appreciates your ability to communicate well in this dominant global language. So these are the three forms of capital, and between that, I try to draw a line to draw the relationship of these capital and the level of self-efficacy and educational success that students can have. So studies have shown that family income, parental involvement, and social support all contribute to developing or shaping student self-efficacy and educational success somehow. I have the detailed list of references at the end for your review. Okay, so with that knowledge gaps identified and with the theoretical framework established, I can confidently set out my research questions now. There are three of them. First, I want to know what is the impact of EMI participation on self-efficacy, and I track that from year 3 to year 4 of their studies when compared to the first language medium instruction in Vietnam. The second question I want to ask, does the effect of EMI on academic outcomes vary across students with different levels of economic, social, and cultural capital in Vietnam? And the final one, which is a bit more qualitative in nature, I want to know how do students perceive the relationship between their instructional medium and their self-efficacy change. Okay, so in terms of my methodology, the research design that I choose to conduct my research, it's a longitudinal research. As you can see, there are two phases of data collection. The first one started in May 2021, in the peak of the pandemic, if anyone still remember. So entirely the data collection was done remotely. And then the second, and I waited for 12 months, and the second phase started 1 year after that in May 2022. I think we are still in the pandemic at that point, I'm not sure. And then it's comparative because I compare performance and scores between two groups. The first one is English medium instruction, so those students learn entirely or are taught entirely in English. And the other group are Vietnamese medium instruction, who learn academic content through their first mother tongue, Vietnamese. And they all studying for the same degrees of international business, delivered by the same instructors or content lecturers. So I'm quite confident about the integrity of the comparity of these two groups. Then the first phase, as well as the second phase, I asked students several demographic questions about their household income levels, their levels of parental education, and also in Vietnam it's very prevalent that more wealthy or wealthier groups, they want to get more private education in English as well, outside of their formal learning. So I asked them about the amount of time they commit to these kind of shadow education or informal learning as well, so as an indicator of the cultural capital. And very importantly, I designed a self-efficacy questionnaire and asked them to basically report on their level of self-efficacy at different points in time of their studies. The purpose of having these longitudinal element is to compare the change after 1 year to see if basically they improve or they decline in their own self-confidence level. Then I also conducted some focus group and some semi-structured interviews with the students just to ask them to elaborate more on what they think and how did they think to compare the actual score change and the perceived change through their qualitative accounts. So that's basically the research design. Then I went on to do the data analysis with statistical analysis and some thematic analysis with the interview as well. Okay, so it comes to the most important part, the findings. So here's some descriptive statistics of my findings. So you can see that the self-efficacy here is the composite score of the self-efficacy. The maximum they can get is 5, which is I completely can do it. And for the EMI cohort, as you can see, the mean score stands around 3.7, which slightly leaning towards I can somehow do it, level 4. And the score suggests that on average, EMI students maintain their level of self-efficacy over time. That's for the EMI. And for the VMI, you can see the VMI groups, they remain quite stable, but they change a little bit. As you can see from year 1 is 3.5 and slightly increase in year 4 to 3.7. So we see that there is subtle improvement in year 4, but we don't know whether it happens by chance or if there are any, we haven't accounted for any pre-existing factors or self-selection variables yet. So, but this is a nice descriptive account of the study. Then I did some paired sample t-tests to examine the significance of the longitudinal change in self-efficacy scores in both VMI and EMI. And the t-test analysis helped me to ascertain whether the observed change that I've seen in the descriptive statistics is statistically significant, and whether there are any other meaningful variations in the self-efficacy. So as you can see in the EMI cohort, the pair sample mean difference is 0.02, and indicating a very small increase in self-efficacy over 1 year period. And then we have VMI cohort. The mean difference is 0.0, and that is also there's a significant statistically increase in their self-efficacy over 1 year. So it's a nearly 10% increase. So now we can establish that there are insignificant change for the EMI cohort. So they very much maintain self-confidence throughout the 2 years. For the VMI students, they are increased in their self-confidence or self-efficacy, so they become more and more self-efficacious. So this is the score for the whole composite index that I try to average out through different items in the questionnaire. Next, I want to talk about the item level change. So we're going to look at individual items to see which areas that the students feel more confident or maintain the same or slightly a bit decline. So this chart is for EMI cohort, and that compares between EMI in year 3 and EMI in year 4. I don't know if we can see the text here. I'll try to articulate as much as I can. So in terms of what I saw here is that in terms of business English related tasks, the results reveal that EMI students in year 3 reported high level of self-efficacy. So for example, with statements such as I can draft business email, or I can comprehend English stories, students felt very confident and scored very highly. As you can see, it's the more blue side, the dark blue side. However, for the academic tasks such as comprehension of business lectures, or completing coursework, or awareness of journal research, results were a bit more mixed. Students feel a bit more hesitant, and there are a lot more red and orange in color, suggesting that they are quite low in their confidence. So it suggests that students might have struggled a little bit with complex academic content, but they feel more confident with tasks involving English. So this is for EMI group. And let's move on to VMI students. We can see more or less the same pattern here. Students reported that for tasks related to general English, such as I can communicate English, I can understand English TV programs or explain business topics, they score quite a low levels actually. So academic content, complex academic, still the areas of challenge to both VMI and EMI students at this stage. But as you can see for year 4, you can see a much more optimistic picture with a lot of blue. So VMI students sort of reported with more change and improvement. So let's talk a little bit about the regression result of EMI self-efficacy, which is directly addressing my second question, whether the change in self-efficacy vary across students with different social backgrounds. So I choose three main variables to look at. The first one is the interaction between students and their household income, which refers to the economic capital we talked about Bourdieu previously. Then secondly, the level of their private English tuition, so approximating the cultural capital. And thirdly, the high school selectiveness, whether student attended a selective high school in Vietnam. What I found here using interactional term analysis is that there's no significant, statistically significant interactions result across the three forms of capital, which runs counter to Bourdieu's proposed theory. And I'll explain why, but for now we know that there's no difference between students coming from higher household income background or doing more private tuition or going to selective school. They don't report on higher level of self-efficacy than those who don't get access to these resources within the EMI program. And I'll explain it why. It sounds very counterintuitive, but we wait for that in the discussion. Finally, let's talk about some interview results that I've got from the students. So their perceptions of the effectiveness of EMI on their self-efficacy. So there are some thematic patterns here. Students do feel that the more they using English, the more they become more proactive and more confident with the English-speaking environment afforded by the EMI context. And then also being in the EMI environment helped them to shape their identity through social modeling as well. So they got support from professors and peers, which helped them to develop their language skills. But some of them also reported on the effects of the pandemic on their studies. For example, the year has been really tough. All the classes were online, so limited interaction with successful peers and instructor also limited their chance to develop their self-efficacy in their academic as well as their English skills. And also some verbal persuasion evidence as well. So students report that there's been a lack of support and guidance from the universities. For example, some extra language support program from the university will be helpful, or if there are some one-to-one meetings with the professors, that will be conducive to their success. Okay, so finally, let's talk about some of the implications of the EMI, effectiveness of EMI. So I learned from this that EMI self-efficacy did not change, so they remain stable and already very high at 3.7, I think. And there are some potential explanations for this non-change in EMI. So that can be contributed to their pre-existing advantages before coming to the program. So these EMI programs are fees charging in Vietnam. They're already very costly to attend. So it might be the fact that students already coming from a very higher baseline confidence before they enter the program. There is maybe some potential for selection bias because the fact that they choose a more demanding EMI program indicate that they're already very confident about their own ability. And there can be some expectation and performance mismatch because students when they attended those selective high schools, they used to getting very high scores, and now coming to the university and, adapting with the new stage of education, there might be some mismatch that can influence their self-perceptions. And of course, there are always some limitations with the way that I measure the self-efficacy, just like other research. So the composite nature of self-efficacy might not explain the whole picture of the student's self-confidence. And I fully acknowledge that it's more than just one composite score, and we need to look at different dimensions that shape self-efficacy as a multi-dimensional construct. Then we also looked at the item level change, so we can see that there are some areas that students feel particularly self-confident about, especially tasks related to English, but there are some areas such as academic skills where they feel so short of. So giving that detailed insight into where students are struggling or finding it challenging will help us as educators to design more effective intervention programs to help support our students. Then implication on the equity of EMI. It's pleasing to see that the socioeconomic background has limited impact, and there are some discrepancies with prior research as well. And one thing that I found is that the context matter a lot when we talk about self-efficacy. The way that we measure self-efficacy is different. The way that we define what are classified as social, economic, and cultural capital is different. So that can lead to a lot of variation in the way we change. And also when we talk about self-efficacy, it's really tied to the power of individual agency and how one's inner strength and how one's perception about their own ability can actually be more influential than the forces of structural factors around them. So I find that quite interesting. Some policy implications before I run out of time. There should be some more promotion of self-regulation skills, institutional and pastoral support for struggling students, especially for the areas that we've identified. There should be some overhaul of the EMI to be more context sensitive and understand and address the lack of effectiveness on EMI to help students develop their self-efficacy a bit more. Some selective references, and thank you so much for your attention. Really appreciated it. Thank you.